The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as Ambassador Sarah Chen's voice echoed through the vast crystalline dome. The single word she had spoken hung in the air like a weapon waiting to detonate. Fine. Around the circular amphitheater, representatives from 47 different species shifted uncomfortably in their specialized seating arrangements. The Vorthak delegation, with their multiple eye stalks, twisted nervously. The crystalline Zanari dimmed their natural luminescence. Even the normally stoic Korvan military advisors exchanged worried glances through their helmet visors. Ambassador Chen stood motionless at the human podium, her dark eyes scanning the assembled aliens with an expression that had become dangerously familiar to those who had dealt with her species for the past decade. It was the same look human diplomats got just before they stopped talking and started doing things that made the galaxy very, very nervous. High Counselor Thex High of the Altarian hegemony was the first to break the oppressive silence. His purple-tinged skin had gone several shades darker, a clear sign of distress among his people. Ambassador Chen, perhaps we should discuss the terms of the proposed resource allocation more thoroughly. The Council is willing to negotiate. No, Chen's voice cut through his words like a plasma torch through tissue paper. You've made your position clear. Humanity's colonies are too new, too small, too insignificant to warrant protection from the Devourer fleet. Our request for defensive support has been denied. Our plea for evacuation assistance has been rejected. Our offer to share our defensive technologies has been dismissed as primitive. She paused, letting each word settle into the minds of the assembled representatives. Several species were now actively communicating through their private channels, and the soft hum of translation devices working overtime filled the chamber. So, fine, we'll handle it ourselves. The reaction was immediate and electric. The bird-like screi began their distress calls, a sound like breaking glass mixed with dying wind chimes. The aquatic Murthane delegation started bubbling frantically in their environmental suits. But it was the human military attaché standing behind Chen who truly terrified the assembly. Colonel Marcus Rodriguez hadn't moved a muscle, hadn't changed his expression, hadn't even blinked. But every species present had learned to read human body language over the past decade, and they all recognized the subtle signs. The slight tension in his shoulders, the way his hands rested just a little too casually near his sidearm, the microscopic tightening around his eyes. This was what humans looked like just before they did something that defied all logic, reason, and self-preservation. The Devourer fleet was the most feared force in the known galaxy. They had consumed 17 civilizations in the past century, stripping worlds bare of resources and leaving nothing but cosmic debris in their wake. Their technology was beyond anything the Galactic Council possessed. Their ships were massive, their numbers seemed endless, and their hunger was insatiable. When the fleet had been detected heading toward the Rim territories where humanity's newest colonies were located, the obvious solution was evacuation. The Council had run the calculations. The defensive capabilities of 3 human colonies against a force that had destroyed empires was not even worth modeling. It would be a massacre, lasting mere hours. But humans, as the galaxy had learned repeatedly over the past decade, did not think like other species. Ambassador, High Counselor Thex High tried again, his voice now taking on the pleading tone that had become standard when dealing with humans who had said, "Fine." The Devourer fleet numbers in the thousands. They have devastated entire sectors. Your colonies have a combined population of barely 2 million, with minimal defensive capabilities. This is not a matter of courage or determination. This is simple mathematics. Chen tilted her head slightly, and those who knew humans well enough recognized the gesture as particularly ominous. Mathematics. Yes. Let's talk about mathematics, High Counselor. She gestured to the holographic display that materialized above the center of the chamber. Star charts appeared, showing the current position of the Devourer fleet and their projected course toward human space. The fleet consists of approximately 3,000 ships of various classes. Their largest vessels are 12 kilometers long and mount planet-cracking weaponry. Their smaller craft are still larger than our heaviest cruisers. By your calculations, and I quote from the Council's official report, human resistance would be negligible and brief. The display zoomed in on the 3 human colonies in the fleet's path: New Terra, Kepler Station, and Haven's Rest. small blue dots in the vast emptiness of space, practically invisible against the red tide of approaching destruction. However, Chen continued, her voice taking on the conversational tone that made veteran diplomats reach for their emergency communication devices. Your calculations are based on conventional defensive strategies, fleet-to-fleet engagement, fortress worlds, linear battle tactics. She paused again, and this time her smile was visible. It was not a reassuring expression. Humans don't think conventionally. The Corvan military representative, General Vextar, leaned forward in his powered armor. Ambassador, with respect, unconventional thinking will not overcome such overwhelming odds. We have seen the Devourer fleet in action. They are merciless and efficient. They have overcome species far more advanced than your own. They're 5. We have seen the Devourer fleet. Also in said, we have seen the Devourer fleet. And we have seen the Devourer fleet. Have they ever fought humans before, General? The question hung in the air for a long moment before Vextar responded. No, but then your analysis is based on incomplete data. Colonel Rodriguez stepped forward slightly, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had seen combat across a dozen different worlds. The Council seems to forget that humanity didn't ask for your protection because we needed it. We asked because we thought you'd want to help. Turns out, we were wrong about that. The implications of his words struck the Assembly like a physical blow. The Galactic Council had interpreted humanity's request for assistance as a desperate plea from a weak species facing extinction, but humans didn't make desperate pleas. They made tactical decisions. Ambassador Chen nodded approvingly at her military attaché's statement. Colonel Rodriguez raises an important point. The Council has consistently underestimated human capabilities because you measure us by your own standards. You think in terms of fleet strength, industrial capacity, and technological advancement. The holographic display shifted, showing human ships and installations. They were indeed smaller than most Council designs, appearing almost primitive by galactic standards, but you've never asked the right questions about humanity. You've never wondered why a species that achieved spaceflight barely 2 centuries ago has already established colonies in 3 different sectors. You've never questioned how we've managed to maintain trade relations with over 30 species despite having no formal military alliances. You've never investigated why human colonies have a 100% survival rate in hostile environments, where other species require massive support infrastructures. The chamber was now completely silent except for the background hum of life support systems. Every representative was focused entirely on the human ambassador, and most were beginning to understand that they had made a serious error in judgment. The answer, Chen continued, is that humans excel at doing things that other species consider impossible. We specialize in turning disadvantages into advantages. We have a particular talent for surviving situations that kill everyone else. High Counselor Thex Hai made one last attempt at reason. Ambassador, even if your species possesses certain unconventional capabilities, the mathematics remain unchanged. 3 colonies against 3,000 ships cannot. Cannot what? Chen interrupted. Cannot win? Cannot survive? Cannot fight back? She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of every delegation present. High Counselor, you're thinking like a Galactic Council species. You're assuming this is about ships and weapons and direct confrontation. You're assuming we're going to meet the Devourer fleet in space and try to outgun them. Her smile returned, wider this time and significantly more unsettling. We're not going to fight them in space, High Counselor. We're going to invite them down for a visit. The reaction was immediate chaos. Delegates began shouting in dozens of languages, their translation devices struggling to keep up with the cacophony of alarm, confusion, and outright panic. The Scry were now emitting their species equivalent of air raid sirens. The Zenari were flashing so rapidly, they looked like emergency beacons. But through it all, the 2 humans at the center of the storm remained perfectly calm. You see, Chen said, raising her voice just enough to cut through the noise, the galaxy has spent so much time studying human military capabilities that it forgot to study human nature. You've analyzed our ships and our weapons and our tactics, but you've never really understood what makes humans dangerous. The chamber began to quiet as delegates realized the human ambassador was still speaking. We're persistent. When something doesn't work, we try something else. When that doesn't work, we try something completely insane. And when that doesn't work, she paused, letting the silence build. We get creative. Colonel Rodriguez stepped forward again. And this time, there was no mistaking the predatory expression on his face. The Devourer fleet has never faced an enemy that wanted them to land. Every species they've encountered has tried to keep them in space, where their technological advantages are overwhelming. But humans? We're going to roll out the welcome mat. This is madness, whispered the Murthane representative through their aquatic translator. You cannot possibly hope to defeat them on the ground. Their ground forces are as formidable as their fleet. Who said anything about defeating them? Chen asked, her tone now genuinely curious. We're going to do something much worse than that. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of several delegates reaching for their emergency communication devices. We're going to teach them why humans say fine when everyone else says impossible. And with that, Ambassador Chen gathered her materials and walked out of the chamber, followed by Colonel Rodriguez and the rest of the human delegation. Behind them, they left 47 species of galactic representatives staring at empty space and trying to comprehend what they had just witnessed. In the hours that followed, emergency sessions were called. Military advisors consulted their databases on human tactical doctrine. Xenopsychologists reviewed their files on human behavior patterns. Intelligence agencies activated every monitoring system they had pointed at human space, but nobody could figure out what the humans were planning. All they knew was that when a human said fine in that particular tone of voice, the galaxy was about to learn something new about the species that had quietly colonized 3 sectors in 200 years. And learning new things about humans, the galaxy had discovered, was rarely a pleasant experience. The countdown had begun. The Devourer fleet was still weeks away from human space, but already the ripple effects of humanity's declaration were spreading across the galaxy. Emergency council sessions were being scheduled. Military fleets were being repositioned. Intelligence networks were working overtime, all because 2 humans had walked into the Galactic Council chamber and said the one word that made the entire galaxy nervous. Fine. 3 weeks after the incident in the Galactic Council chamber, deep space monitoring stations across 17 sectors detected something that shouldn't have been possible. The human colonies were broadcasting. Not distress signals or evacuation requests. They were sending out dinner invitations. Lieutenant Zarathek of the Altarian Deep Space Monitor Network stared at her displays in complete confusion. Her translation matrix had to be malfunctioning. There was no other explanation for what she was seeing. Commander, she called across the monitoring station's command deck. You need to see this. Commander Dexhai flowed over to her station, his purple-tinted form shifting with the characteristic grace of his species. What is it, Lieutenant? What? The human colonies, sir. They're transmitting on all frequencies. The message is... She paused, checking her translation matrix again. It appears to be a formal invitation. An invitation to what? To what they're calling a welcome feast. They're inviting the Devourer fleet to visit their worlds and sample human hospitality. Commander Dexhai's skin tone shifted to a deeper purple, indicating severe stress. That's impossible. Run a full diagnostic on your translation systems. 10 minutes later, the diagnostic confirmed what Lieutenant Zarathek had reported. The humans were indeed broadcasting formal invitations to the approaching fleet of galactic destroyers, complete with detailed landing coordinates and suggested arrival times. Sir, the lieutenant said, her voice barely above a whisper. There's more. They're broadcasting recipes. Recipes, cooking instructions, sir, for something they call Devourer stew. Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out in monitoring stations, communication hubs, and intelligence centers. The human transmissions were impossible to ignore because they were being broadcast on every frequency simultaneously, powerful enough to reach systems dozens of light-years away. But the content of the messages was what truly disturbed the galactic community. The humans weren't acting like a species facing extinction. They were acting like they were hosting a dinner party. Admiral Korthvar of the Corvan Deep Space Fleet was reviewing the intercepts when his communication officer approached with obvious reluctance. "Admiral, we've received new intelligence on human activities in the Rim territories." "Report." "Sir, they've suspended all evacuation procedures. All civilian ships have been recalled to the colonies. They're actually bringing more humans to the target worlds." Admiral Korthvar's mandibles clicked together in agitation. "That makes no sense. Are they attempting some form of ritual suicide?" 1. "No, sir. According to our intelligence assets, they're preparing. But not for defense. They're setting up what they call proper welcoming facilities." The Admiral's translator struggled with the next part of the report. "They're building barbecue pits, sir. In the research stations of the Zenari Collective, xenobiologists were working around the clock to understand human behavior patterns." Dr. Lumara, one of their leading experts on human psychology, was presenting her findings to an emergency council of scientists. "The evidence suggests the humans are suffering from a form of species-wide psychological break," she announced to her colleagues. "Their actions are completely inconsistent with survival instinct. They appear to be inviting their own destruction, while simultaneously preparing for some form of celebration." "Could this be a religious response?" asked Dr. Vexlin, flashing in concerned yellow hues. "Some form of ritualistic acceptance of fate?" "That was my initial theory, but the evidence doesn't support it. Humans don't have a unified religion, and their individual belief systems don't include mass suicide as a response to external threats. Additionally, their preparations are highly organized and practical. This isn't the behavior of a species accepting death. This is the behavior of a species preparing for something." "Preparing for what?" "That's what terrifies me. I don't know." Meanwhile, in human space, the 3 colonies were bustling with activity that would have confused anyone not familiar with human culture. On New Terra, the largest of the 3 colonies, Governor Patricia Reyes was overseeing the construction of what appeared to be the galaxy's largest outdoor kitchen. Massive grills, smokers, and roasting pits were being assembled by work crews who sang while they worked. The singing, broadcast on open frequencies, had become another source of confusion for galactic intelligence agencies. The songs weren't battle hymns or funeral dirges. They were cooking songs. "Keep those fires burning hot and bright," the workers sang as they assembled another industrial-grade barbecue pit. "Gonna cook up something special tonight." Governor Reyes checked her watch and smiled. The Devourer fleet would arrive in 4 days, and the preparations were right on schedule. "How's the marinade coming along?" she asked her agricultural coordinator. "Pretty good, ma'am. The chemistry team says they've got the mixture balanced just right. Should be ready for the main course when our guests arrive." On Kepler Station, Administrator Chen Wei, no relation to Ambassador Chen, was reviewing supply manifests with the enthusiasm of someone planning the social event of the century. "Do we have enough plates?" he asked his logistics coordinator. "Sir, with respect, plates might not be our primary concern when facing the Devourer fleet." Administrator Chen gave his coordinator the look that every human bureaucrat had perfected over centuries of dealing with people who didn't understand proper planning. "Lieutenant, when you invite guests for dinner, you make sure you have proper place settings. It's called civilization." "But sir, these guests are coming to destroy us." "Says who? Did you ask them what they wanted? Did anyone bother to find out if maybe they've been consuming worlds because they're hungry and nobody's offered them a decent meal?" The logistics coordinator stared at his superior for several seconds before reaching for his emergency medication. This was the 3rd time this week he'd needed it. On Haven's Rest, the smallest colony, Mayor Sarah O'Brien was taking a different approach. While the other colonies focused on preparation and logistics, Haven's Rest was handling the cultural aspects of the welcome. "How's the entertainment committee coming along?" she asked her deputy. "Well, ma'am, the band's been practicing that new song you requested. Welcome to the Neighborhood is sounding pretty good, and the dance troupe has been working on something they call the Devourer Shuffle." "Excellent. Nothing says hospitality like proper entertainment." The deputy mayor looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, are you sure about this? I mean, these beings have destroyed entire civilizations." Mayor O'Brien nodded seriously. "And that's exactly why they need a proper welcome. Think about it, James. You spend centuries traveling through space, consuming worlds to survive, never once having someone treat you like a guest instead of an enemy. Wouldn't that make you a little grumpy? I suppose. Trust me on this one. Hospitality is a powerful force. And humans? We wrote the book on hospitality. While the colonies prepared their welcome, the rest of the galaxy watched in mounting horror. Emergency sessions of the Galactic Council were called daily. Military fleets were repositioned. Some species began preparing their own evacuation plans, in case whatever the humans were doing somehow made things worse. But perhaps the most disturbing development came from the Corvin Intelligence Service. Agent Vexthal had been monitoring human communications for the past week, and her reports had become increasingly alarming. Director, the humans appear to be treating this as a genuine social event. They're not speaking in code. They're not using metaphors. They actually seem to believe they can resolve this situation through hospitality. Director Morthak's armor plates clinked together as he shifted uncomfortably. Agent, that's impossible. No species survives first contact with the Devourer fleet by offering them food. Sir, that's what's so disturbing. Either the humans have completely lost touch with reality, or they know something about the Devourer fleet that we don't. What could they possibly know that we don't? We've been studying the fleet for over a century. I don't know, sir. But in the past week, I've intercepted over 3,000 communications between the human colonies. They're discussing recipes, table arrangements, proper serving techniques, and something they keep referring to as the main course. And sir? They're excited. Director Morthak was quiet for a long moment. Excited? Yes, sir. They're looking forward to this. Every intercepted communication shows humans who are genuinely enthusiastic about meeting the Devourer fleet. It's like they're preparing for the social event of the century. 2 days before the fleet's arrival, the human transmissions changed. Instead of general invitations and cooking songs, they began broadcasting detailed landing instructions. Welcome, friends, came the voice of Governor Reyes from New Terra. We've prepared special landing areas for your convenience. Please note that we've arranged our facilities to accommodate ships of various sizes. Larger vessels should use the designated areas marked with the bright orange beacons. We've prepared special reception areas for your crews. The transmissions were so polite, so genuinely welcoming, that several galactic intelligence agencies began investigating the possibility that humans were a different species than previously believed. On the final day before the fleet's arrival, something unprecedented happened. The Devourer fleet responded. For the first time in recorded history, the fleet sent a communication to their intended targets that wasn't a demand for surrender. Human colonies. The transmission began in a voice that sounded like grinding metal and dying stars. We do not understand your transmissions. We are here to consume your worlds and harvest your resources. Your invitations are confusing. Governor Reyes responded within an hour. Oh, that's perfectly understandable. It's probably a cultural miscommunication. See, when humans say consume, we usually mean eating food together in a social setting. When you say harvest, we think about gathering ingredients for cooking. We figured you might be hungry after such a long journey through space, so we've prepared a proper meal for you and your crews. There was silence from the fleet for several hours. Then, you wish to feed us? Of course. It's basic hospitality. You've traveled such a long way, and you must be absolutely starving. We've prepared something special that we think you'll really enjoy. Another long pause. What have you prepared? Governor Reyes's voice took on the proud tone of a chef describing her signature dish. Well, we've learned that your species requires certain rare minerals and energy compounds to survive. So we've created what we call Devourer Stew. A carefully prepared mixture of exactly what your biological systems need, but prepared properly and served with appropriate seasonings and side dishes. You have studied our nutritional requirements? Of course, when you're cooking for guests, you need to know their dietary needs. We've spent the last 3 weeks analyzing your biological signatures and energy patterns to create the perfect meal. The silence that followed lasted for over 6 hours. When the fleet finally responded, something in their transmission had changed. The grinding metal quality was still there, but underneath it was something that sounded almost like confusion. "No species has ever offered to feed us." "Well," Governor Reyes said with the matter-of-fact tone that had made the galaxy nervous about humans for the past decade, "that's because nobody asked what you needed. They just assumed you were monsters. But humans? We don't assume. We investigate." "You investigated us?" "Of course. Basic anthropology. You can't understand a species until you understand their needs. And once we understood that you consume worlds because you require specific mineral and energy compounds to survive, well, the solution was obvious. Solution? Proper nutrition, served with respect and hospitality. No need to strip mine entire worlds when you can get the same nutrients from a well-prepared meal." The transmission from the fleet that followed contained something that made every monitoring station in the galaxy check their equipment for malfunctions. The Devourer fleet was laughing. It wasn't a pleasant sound. Imagine the grinding of tectonic plates mixed with the screaming of solar winds. But it was unmistakably laughter. "Humans," the fleet's commander said, and for the first time in a century, their voice didn't sound like impending doom. "We will accept your invitation." Across the galaxy, intelligence agencies went into full crisis mode. Emergency sessions were called. Military fleets were put on high alert. Some species began immediate evacuation procedures, because if the humans were right about the Devourer fleet, it meant that for over a century, the galaxy had been running from a problem that could have been solved with a dinner invitation. And, if the humans were wrong, well, the galaxy was about to witness the most polite genocide in recorded history. The first Devourer ship touched down on New Terra at exactly 1,400 hours, local time. Across the galaxy, billions of beings held their collective breath as monitoring stations recorded the moment that would either mark the most successful first contact in galactic history or the beginning of the most polite extinction event ever witnessed. The ship was massive, a kilometer-long construct of dark metal and pulsing energy conduits that had appeared in the nightmares of 17 extinct civilizations. It settled onto the specially prepared landing area with surprising grace, its landing thrusters carefully positioned to avoid damaging the welcome banners that the humans had hung around the landing zone. Governor Patricia Reyes stood at the head of a delegation of 50 humans, all dressed in their finest formal wear. She carried a bouquet of flowers from New Terra's agricultural domes and wore the expression of someone genuinely excited to meet new people. Behind her, the massive barbecue pits smoked gently in the afternoon air, tended by human chefs who had spent 3 weeks perfecting their recipes. The smell of properly seasoned food drifted across the landing area, carried by the careful positioning of atmospheric processors that had been repurposed as the galaxy's largest dinner bell. The ship's landing ramp extended with a sound like grinding mountains, and for several minutes, nothing happened. Then something emerged that made every monitoring station in the galaxy verify their sensors. The beings that came down the ramp were large, certainly 3 meters tall, and covered in what appeared to be crystalline armor that glowed with internal energy. But they moved hesitantly, almost shyly, like dinner guests arriving at an unfamiliar house. The lead figure stopped at the bottom of the ramp and spoke in a voice that, while still possessed of that grinding quality that had terrified civilizations, now carried an unmistakable note of uncertainty. "We are here for the meal?" Governor Reyes stepped forward with a warm smile, extending the bouquet of flowers. "Welcome to New Terra. You must be exhausted after such a long journey. I'm Patricia Reyes, and we're absolutely delighted to have you here." The Devourer commander, for that's clearly what he was, stared at the flowers for several seconds before carefully accepting them with hands that could have crushed battleships. "These are decorative vegetation? They're flowers. It's a human tradition to give gifts to welcome guests. We grow them specially for occasions like this." "Isa, occasions like feeding us? Well, that's part of it. But really, this is about friendship. You see, we've been studying your species' history, and we realize that in all your travels across the galaxy, nobody has ever simply invited you to sit down and share a meal like civilized beings." The commander's glowing eye nodes flickered in what monitoring stations were desperately trying to interpret. "Friendship," he repeated, as if testing an unfamiliar word. "That's right. Would you like to meet the others? We've prepared places for your entire crew. What followed was perhaps the strangest scene in galactic history. More devourers emerged from the ship. Dozens of them, all moving with the same hesitant uncertainty. The humans greeted each one individually, learning their names, which turned out to be complex energy frequencies that human translators rendered as things like resonance of deep stone and echo of stellar wind, and guiding them to seats around the massive outdoor dining area that had been constructed for the occasion. Now, Governor Reyes announced to the assembled devourers, "We know you need specific mineral compounds and energy frequencies to sustain your biological processes. Traditional food wouldn't be suitable for your species, so our chemistry team has spent the past 3 weeks developing something special." She gestured to the cooking areas, where human chefs were tending to what appeared to be sophisticated chemical reactors disguised as barbecue equipment. "We call it Devourer Stew. But it's really a carefully balanced mixture of the exact mineral compounds and energy densities your species requires, prepared using techniques we borrowed from our culinary traditions." The Devourer commander leaned forward, his attention completely focused on the human governor. "You studied our biological requirements? Of course. When you're cooking for guests, you need to know their dietary needs. We analyzed your energy signatures, studied the composition of worlds you've consumed in the past, and calculated the exact nutritional balance your species requires." "But why?" Governor Reyes looked genuinely puzzled by the question. "Because you were coming to visit, and we wanted to be good hosts. It would be terribly rude to invite someone for dinner and then not prepare something they could actually eat." The silence that followed was broken by a sound that monitoring stations across the galaxy initially identified as a system malfunction. It took several minutes for xenobiologists to realize what they were hearing. The Devourer commander was crying. It wasn't tears. Their species didn't have tear ducts, but it was clearly the same emotional response. Energy patterns flickered across his crystalline armor in waves that their translation systems interpreted as overwhelming gratitude and disbelief. "For over 1,000 years," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that made nearby crystals resonate, "we have traveled between worlds, consuming what we needed to survive. And for over 1,000 years, every species we encountered saw us only as destroyers. They never asked why we consumed worlds. They never asked what we needed. They only saw the consumption and declared us monsters." He looked at the flowers he still held carefully in his massive hands. "You are the first to ask what we needed instead of simply telling us to go away." Governor Reyes nodded sympathetically. "Well, that's their loss. Now, shall we eat? The stew is ready, and I think you'll find it quite satisfying." What happened next became known throughout the galaxy as the New Terra miracle. The Devourers didn't just eat the specially prepared meal. They savored it. For the first time in their species' history, they experienced food as something other than mere survival fuel. The human chefs had not only provided perfect nutrition but had somehow managed to create flavors that the Devourers found delightful. And humans, being humans, had prepared entertainment. The band from Haven's Rest performed "Welcome to the Neighborhood" while the Devourers ate, followed by a cultural exchange where the visitors shared their own forms of music, harmonic resonances that made the local crystal formations sing in response. The dance troupe performed the Devourer Shuffle, which turned out to be a surprisingly accurate interpretation of Devourer ceremonial movement patterns, learned from careful observation of their ship's landing sequences. But the real revelation came when the human children arrived. Every colony had evacuated their children at the first sign of danger. Except that humans, being humans, had brought them back once they realized their guests were just very large people who had never been properly welcomed anywhere. The sight of human children offering hand-drawn pictures to beings who had been the terror of the galaxy for centuries was initially alarming. Then it became heartwarming when the Devourers began carefully preserving each drawing as if it were a priceless artifact. "Nobody has ever made art for us," Echo of Stellar Wind explained to one of the monitoring drones that had been allowed to observe the event. "These small humans create images that serve no survival function, and they give them to us freely." The monitoring drone's operator, a Zenari xenobiologist, found herself frantically updating her files on human behavior patterns. Meanwhile, on Kepler Station, similar scenes were playing out with the second wave of devourer ships. Administrator Chen Wei had prepared his own version of the welcoming feast, incorporating local flavors that somehow made the nutritional compounds more appealing to his guests. The secret, he explained to a delegation of utterly bewildered devourer engineers, is in the presentation. Nutrition is important, but the social context of eating is just as crucial. When you share food with others, it becomes more than just fuel. It becomes communion. The devourer engineers spent the next 4 hours asking detailed questions about human food culture, taking notes with the intensity of beings discovering a completely new form of science. On Haven's Rest, Mayor Sarah O'Brien was hosting what she called a cultural appreciation dinner, where humans and devourers shared stories about their respective histories. "So you're telling me," said Resonance of Deep Stone, "that humans fight wars over the proper way to prepare food?" "Oh yes," Mayor O'Brien confirmed cheerfully. "We have passionate disagreements about whether tomatoes belong in certain sauces, the proper temperature for serving beverages, and don't even get us started on pizza toppings. This seems inefficient. Maybe. But it's also how we know food is important to us. When something matters to humans, we argue about it. It's our way of showing we care." The argue about it, the devourer considered this for several minutes before responding. "We have never argued about food. We have only consumed." "Well, now you can argue with us. Would you like to hear about the great barbecue sauce controversy of 2387? By the end of the first day, something unprecedented had occurred. The devourer fleet had not consumed a single world. Instead, they had experienced the first peaceful first contact in their species' history. But the real shock came on the second day, when the fleet's commander made an announcement that was broadcast across the galaxy. "To the Galactic Council, and all who monitor these transmissions," he said, his voice now carrying harmonics that xenobiologists identified as contentment. "We, the people you call the Devourer Fleet, formally request to open diplomatic relations with the species known as humans." The pause that followed was filled with the sound of emergency sessions being called across 17 sectors. "For over a millennium, we have consumed worlds to survive, believing that other species would never accept our nutritional requirements. The humans have shown us that consumption and cooperation are not mutually exclusive." Another pause. "We wish to learn more about this concept they call hospitality, and to share our knowledge of mineral processing and energy cultivation in exchange for continued friendship. We also wish to inform the galaxy that any hostile action taken against the human colonies will be considered an act of aggression against our people." The transmission ended, but the implications were clear. The most feared force in the galaxy had just declared themselves the protectors of humanity. In the emergency session of the Galactic Council that followed, High Counselor Thexhai found himself in the unprecedented position of trying to explain how 3 human colonies had just ended a 1,000-year reign of terror using barbecue sauce and proper table manners. "I don't understand," he said to the assembled delegates, many of whom were still in shock. "How did they know this would work?" Ambassador Chen, who had returned to the council chamber with the same unsettling smile she'd worn 3 weeks earlier, was happy to explain. "We didn't know it would work, High Counselor. But we knew what you didn't know. That the devourers were people, not monsters. And when you're dealing with people, even very large, scary people, who accidentally destroy civilizations, the best approach is usually to treat them with basic respect and offer them a decent meal. But the risk was worth taking. You see, High Counselor, this is what happens when humans say, 'Fine.' We don't give up. We don't surrender. We don't run away. We look at the problem from a completely different angle and find a solution that nobody else considered." She gestured to the holographic display showing the current situation in human space, where devourer ships were now parked peacefully alongside human vessels, sharing technology and cultural exchanges. The galaxy spent 1,000 years running from the devourer fleet. Humans spent 3 weeks learning to cook for them. And now? Ambassador Chen's smile grew wider. Now the galaxy's most feared military force has volunteered to protect human colonies And we've gained new friends who are teaching us how to process rare minerals and cultivation energy in ways we never imagined possible. She paused, looking around the chamber at the still stunned delegates. Oh, and we've also learned that their ships are absolutely perfect for large-scale food delivery to underdeveloped colonies. Turns out, when you have vessels designed to consume and transport massive amounts of resources, they're ideal for humanitarian aid missions. The implications hit the assembled delegates like a physical blow. You're saying they're going to help with galactic humanitarian efforts? They've already volunteered. Apparently, after 1,000 years of accidentally terrorizing the galaxy, they're quite enthusiastic about being helpful instead. High Counselor Thexhai sat back in his chair, his purple complexion cycling through several shades of confusion. This is completely unprecedented. Yes, Ambassador Chen agreed. Humans have a talent for that. She gathered her materials and prepared to leave, but paused at the chamber door. Oh, and High Counselor? The Devourers have asked me to extend an invitation to the entire Galactic Council. They're hosting a feast next month to celebrate their new friendship with humanity. They'd like to learn about other galactic cultures and see if there are any other misunderstandings they can clear up through proper dialogue. She smiled one last time before departing. I suggest you bring an appetite. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy struggled to adapt to a new reality, where the most feared force in known space had become the most enthusiastic supporters of diplomatic solutions and shared meals. The Devourer fleet began working with human colonies to establish what they called friendship stations, facilities designed to welcome other species who might have been previously misunderstood. They shared their technology freely, revolutionizing energy cultivation and mineral processing across human space. They also began what historians would later call the Great Apology Tour, visiting the homeworlds of species they had previously encountered, to explain the misunderstandings and offer reparations in the form of technological assistance and shared resources. Most remarkably, they became the galaxy's most effective peacekeeping force, not through intimidation, but through their newfound enthusiasm for diplomatic solutions and cultural exchange. It turns out, Echo of Stellar Wind explained to a gathering of galactic reporters, that when you've spent 1,000 years accidentally being the bad guys, you become very motivated to be the good guys instead. And across the galaxy, military strategists, diplomats, and intelligence agencies all reached the same conclusion. When humans said, "Fine," the galaxy changed. Not through force, not through technology, not through superior numbers or advanced weapons, through the simple radical act of treating their enemies like people and inviting them to dinner. It was, everyone agreed, the most terrifyingly human thing they had ever witnessed.